Lazy boy can't even stand up. Those words echoed through the Metropolitan Grand Hall as Aiden Mitchell's wheelchair glided across the polished marble floor, each movement a defiance of gravity and judgment. The whispers from 8 years ago transformed into gasps of awe as his body moved with liquid grace, telling a story of transformation that none of the $1,000 ticket holders expected to witness tonight. In the front row, his former basketball coach's champagne glass trembled slightly, forgotten in his hand. The same man who had once told 13-year-old Aiden to stop making excuses now watched, transfixed, as his ex-player turned the stage into a canvas of impossible beauty. The spotlights painted ribbons of gold across Aiden's face as he executed a perfect spiral turn, his wheelchair becoming an extension of his artistry rather than a symbol of limitation. A hint of a smile played across his features. Not the shy, uncertain expression of the boy who once collapsed on a basketball court, but the confident grin of a 16-year-old who had transformed his greatest challenge into his most powerful strength. If only they knew where this journey began. 8 years earlier, the basketball arced through the air, its trajectory perfect as 12-year-old Aiden jumped for the winning shot. Time seemed to slow as his feet left the ground, but something was wrong. His legs, usually strong and reliable, felt like lead. The ball never reached his hands. Instead, Aiden crumpled to the court floor, his teammates' cheers turning to confused murmurs. "Mitchell's faking it," someone whispered. "He's just scared of missing the shot." But David Mitchell knew better. He'd seen that same look of confused fear in his son's eyes once before. David's calloused hands, rough from years of construction work, gripped the steering wheel as he drove Aiden to yet another doctor's appointment. Dr. Wallace's office had become a familiar prison of beige walls and empty answers. "Boys his age often act out after losing a parent," the doctor said dismissively, not even looking up from his clipboard. "Especially when they lose their mother." David's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. Teresa had been gone for 3 years, but her absence still echoed through their lives like the ghost of an unfinished dance. The following weeks blurred into a nightmare of deteriorating abilities. Aiden's basketball teammates stopped coming by, their absence as loud as their previous laughter. The wheelchair arrived on a Tuesday, its metallic frame gleaming with cruel promise. "It's temporary," David assured, even as doubt gnawed at his certainty. But Aiden barely heard him, transfixed instead by the old video playing on his laptop. His mother dancing across a stage, her movements telling stories without words. Mr. Reyes, the school counselor with eyes that missed nothing, noticed patterns others ignored. The way Aiden's legs trembled before giving out. The split-second delay between thought and movement. The subtle shifts in his gait that preceded each fall. He kept detailed notes, building a case while others built walls. "There's something systematic happening here," he told David during an after-school meeting. "And it's not in his head." The breaking point came during what should have been a routine physical education class. As Aiden sat in his wheelchair watching his former teammates play basketball, Tyler Jenkins, once his best friend, threw a ball that accidentally hit him. "What's wrong, Mitchell? Too lazy to catch?" The words hung in the air like poison. But it wasn't the taunt that changed everything. It was what happened next. As Aiden instinctively moved to dodge the ball, his body responded with a grace that surprised everyone, including himself. The wheelchair spun with precision, and for a split second, he wasn't avoiding a projectile. He was dancing. That evening, while helping his father sort through old boxes in their garage, Aiden discovered a dusty DVD labeled Teresa's Final Performance. As the video played on his laptop, he watched in awe as his mother transformed her wheelchair into a tool of artistic expression, dancing with a partner who matched her movements from the ground. David found his son hours later, eyes glued to the screen, rewinding and watching the same sequences repeatedly. "She never let it stop her," Aiden whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Why should I?" But life had other plans. As Aiden's condition worsened, the medical bills mounted. David started taking extra shifts, his eyes growing more hollow with each passing week. The construction site became his second home, even as whispers spread about the man who kept leaving early for his problem child's appointments. Yet in those precious hours between work and worry, David would sit silently watching his son attempt to recreate his mother's movements, each try bringing a new discovery, each failure fueling determination. The truth arrived on a rainy Thursday, carried in the careful words of Dr. Lynn, a specialist who actually took the time to listen. As she explained the rare neuromuscular condition affecting Aiden's legs, David felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. A name for their enemy meant a chance to fight it, but the battle would cost more than money. It would demand everything they had, and then some. Yet as father and son drove home through the storm, Aiden's hand found his father's shoulder. "Dad," he said quietly, "I think I know what I want to do now." The wheelchair wasn't just a means of movement anymore. It was the first step in a dance they never expected to learn. The medical center loomed before them like a modern-day fortress, its glass walls reflecting the morning sun with cold indifference. Aiden gripped the wheels of his chair tightly, steeling himself for another day of being poked, prodded, and dismissed. "Remember what your mother used to say," David murmured as they approached the entrance. "Sometimes the hardest steps lead to the most beautiful dances." The words hung between them, a shared memory of Teresa's quiet strength. Dr. Lynn's office felt different from the others, warmer somehow, with photographs of athletes with disabilities lining the walls. Unlike Dr. Wallace's dismissive sneers, her eyes held a sharp intelligence as she reviewed Aiden's file. "These patterns are consistent with something I've seen before," she said, her fingers tracing the timeline Mr. Reyes had so carefully documented. "But we'll need to run more tests to be certain." In the waiting room, Aiden met Kai Chen, a Paralympic athlete with a laugh that filled the sterile space with life. While their fathers discussed insurance forms and payment plans, Kai showed Aiden videos of wheelchair basketball players performing moves that seemed to defy physics itself. "People think the chair limits you," Kai said, his eyes bright with challenge. "But really, it just gives you a different way to fly." The tests came with their own kind of brutality, endless needles, scans, and questions that probed deeper than any medical instrument. But it was the whispers that cut the deepest. "Such a shame," the nurses would murmur when they thought no one could hear. "A young man like that should be playing sports, not..." Their words always trailed off, heavy with unspoken judgment about the grace they'd occasionally glimpse in Aiden's movements between examinations. David's construction site supervisor, Mike, called him into the office on a particularly gray Tuesday. "Look, Mitchell," he said, shuffling papers on his desk. "The crew's been talking. These constant appointments, the early leaves, it's affecting productivity." The words hit harder than any falling beam ever could. "I've got a site to run. Either your boy learns to handle himself or we'll have to make some changes." That night, as David sorted through bills at the kitchen table, his calloused fingers trembling slightly, Aiden watched his mother's video for the 100th time. Something was different now. He could see the technique behind her movements, the way she used momentum and balance to create something beautiful from necessity. When David finally looked up, his son was experimenting with a turn, his wheelchair moving with newfound purpose. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. During yet another round of mobility tests, Dr. Lynn noticed something in Aiden's reflexive movements, a fluidity that seemed almost choreographed. "This isn't just muscle weakness," she said, excitement creeping into her usually measured voice. "Your body is adapting, creating new neural pathways. The question is, what's triggering these adaptations?" Hope arrived in the form of an experimental treatment program, its glossy brochure promising cutting-edge therapies and revolutionary approaches to neuromuscular conditions. But hope, they quickly learned, came with a price tag that made David's heart sink. 3 spots available, thousands of applicants, and a cost that exceeded their annual income. It was Kai who introduced them to Marcus Rodriguez, a former Paralympic dancer, who taught adaptive movement classes at a local community center. "The body remembers what the mind forgets," Marcus said, watching Aiden struggle with a simple weight-shifting exercise. "And sometimes when we stop fighting against what we can't do, we discover what we can." But just as Aiden began to find his rhythm, both in therapy and in Marcus's class, the letter arrived from their insurance company. "Claim denied," it stated in cold, printed letters. "Experimental treatments not covered under current plan." David's hands crumpled the paper, his face a mask of contained fury. Yet when he looked up, he saw Aiden performing one of his mother's signature moves, transformed through his own interpretation. In that moment, something shifted between father and son. A recognition that perhaps their battle wasn't just about walking again, but about finding a new way to soar. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus watched Aiden struggle with a new movement sequence. "Stop thinking like an athlete," Marcus called out, his wheelchair gliding closer. "Your mother didn't fight against her chair, she embraced it as her partner." Aiden paused, sweat beading on his forehead. On his laptop nearby, Teresa's performance video played on loop, a ghostly echo of what could be. Back at school, the whispers had changed. Where there was once mockery, now there was curiosity. During lunch breaks, a small crowd would gather in the courtyard to watch Aiden practice. Even Tyler Jenkins, who had thrown that fateful basketball, found himself transfixed. "How do you make it look so smooth?" he asked one day, genuine wonder replacing his former derision. But before Aiden could answer, his body betrayed him. A sudden spasm sent him pitching forward, his wheelchair clattering against the concrete. The incident sparked a new round of medical consultations. Dr. Lin's office became a war room of sorts, with specialists conferring over test results and treatment options. "The experimental program could help," she explained, hope and hesitation warring in her voice. "But the deadline for applications is approaching, and without insurance." She left the sentence hanging, heavy with unspoken implications. David's struggle at work intensified. His supervisor's patience wore thinner with each missed hour, each early departure. "Mitchell," Mike cornered him one morning, "the boys are talking about organizing a fundraiser for Aiden's treatment." Pride warred with necessity in David's chest. The same crew that had whispered about his problem child now wanted to help. The irony tasted bitter and sweet. It was during one of Marcus's classes that everything shifted. As Aiden executed a particularly challenging turn, his wheelchair caught the light in a way that transformed the entire movement. "That's it!" Marcus exclaimed, his eyes alight with recognition. "You're not just moving, you're telling your story." The other students stopped to watch as Aiden repeated the sequence, each rotation carrying the weight of his journey. The video of that practice session, captured by Kai on his phone, spread through social media like wildfire. "Wheelchair dancer transforms pain into art," read one local blog headline. Comments flooded in, many from others struggling with similar conditions. Among them was a message that made Aiden's heart stop. "This reminds me of Teresa Mitchell's final performance. Same spirit, different generation." But as Aiden's artistic voice grew stronger, his physical challenges mounted. The spasms became more frequent, each one a stark reminder of what was at stake. Dr. Lin's warnings echoed in their minds. Without proper treatment, the condition would continue to progress. The experimental program's deadline loomed like a shadow over every practice, every small victory. One evening, as David helped Aiden stretch after practice, they received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Wallace stood awkwardly in the community center's doorway, his son, a physical therapy student, beside him. "I saw the video," he said, his usual clinical detachment cracking slightly. "I was wrong about you, Aiden, and I'd like to help." His son stepped forward, explaining his interest in adaptive sports therapy, his desire to learn and understand. The fundraiser organized by David's construction crew evolved into something bigger than anyone expected. Local businesses contributed, school families rallied, and even some of Aiden's online followers sent donations. But it was the invitation that arrived from the city's prestigious dance academy that truly changed the game. They wanted Aiden to perform at their annual charity gala, the same event where his mother had once danced. As Aiden prepared for the performance that could change everything, his body chose that moment to remind him of its limitations. A severe spasm during rehearsal sent him crashing into the practice mirrors. The sound of shattering glass was deafening, but it was the silence that followed that truly terrified him. In that moment, as David rushed to his side, Aiden faced his deepest fear. What if his body gave out before he could show the world what he'd discovered? That limitation was just another word for possibility. The shattered mirror fragments reflected a dozen broken versions of Aiden lying on the dance studio floor, each one telling a different story of that crucial moment. Dr. Lin's words from their emergency consultation rang in his ears. The experimental treatment program starts next week. If you want a spot, you need to commit now. The choice seemed impossible. Pursue immediate medical intervention or continue preparing for the charity gala performance that could fund his entire treatment journey. Marcus wheeled into Aiden's hospital room the next morning, his face set with determination. Your mother faced the same choice, he revealed, pulling out a weathered newspaper clipping. 20 years ago, she chose to dance in this same gala instead of starting her treatment right away. She believed that sometimes the spirit needs healing before the body. The article showed a younger Teresa, her wheelchair adorned with flowing ribbons, captivating an audience that included medical benefactors. The physical therapy sessions with Dr. Wallace's son, James, took on a new intensity. We'll modify the choreography, James insisted, his hands supporting Aiden through a modified turn. Work with your body's current limits, not against them. Each movement was a negotiation between ambition and ability, pride and prudence. The spasms continued, but now they began incorporating them into the performance, moments of controlled chaos in an otherwise fluid routine. David's construction crew surprised them by showing up at the community center one weekend, tools in hand. Can't have you practicing in a broken studio, Mike announced gruffly, supervising as his workers installed specialized support rails and shock-absorbent flooring. The same hands that had once whispered doubts now built a foundation for Aiden's dreams. The viral video of Aiden's practice sessions caught the attention of the local news. Teen Dancer Challenge's perceptions became Boy Follows Mother's Legacy, became community rallies around determined dancer. Each headline brought more attention, more pressure, more expectations. But it was a comment from Tyler Jenkins that cut the deepest. I used to think you were faking weakness. Now I realize you were hiding strength. As the gala approached, Aiden's body sent increasingly urgent warnings. The spasms grew more frequent, each one a stark reminder of what was at stake. Dr. Lin made her position clear. Waiting could mean irreversible progression. The treatment program's director called daily, pressing for an answer. 3 spots. 2 days to decide. 1 chance to change everything. The breakthrough came during a late-night practice session. Kai had wheeled in silently, watching as Aiden struggled with a particularly challenging sequence. You're still dancing like you're apologizing, Kai observed. Stop asking permission to take up space. Something clicked. The next run-through, Aiden didn't just dance. He commanded attention, his wheelchair carving bold statements across the floor. David found his son's medical files spread across their kitchen table one night, Teresa's performance video playing beside them. I figured it out, Dad, Aiden said, his voice steady. Mom wasn't just dancing that night, she was negotiating. Her performance convinced 3 major donors to fund a whole wing of accessible medical research. The parallels were clear, but so were the risks. The decision crystallized during a dress rehearsal at the Metropolitan Grand Hall. As Aiden wheeled onto the massive stage for the first time, the space felt alive with possibility. The same stage where his mother had danced, where she had transformed limitation into legacy. A technical malfunction cut the music mid-sequence, but Aiden didn't stop. In the silence, his wheelchair's wheels whispered against the floor, creating their own rhythm. The stagehands stopped their frantic scrambling, mesmerized. Dr. Wallace arrived as they were leaving, his face grave. "The latest test results," he said, handing over an envelope. "You need to see these before you decide." Inside was not just medical data, but a letter of recommendation from him to the treatment program's board. "Sometimes," he wrote, "healing happens in unexpected ways. This young man isn't running from treatment, he's dancing toward it." That night, as father and son sat in their familiar kitchen, the weight of choice hung heavy between them. The treatment program promised medical intervention, but the gala offered something else, a chance to show the world that healing comes in many forms. Aiden's hand found his father's across the table, their calluses matching in different ways. "Mom always said that sometimes you have to risk everything to gain anything," Aiden said softly. "I think I finally understand what she meant." The Metropolitan Grand Hall hummed with anticipation, crystal chandeliers casting diamonds of light across the gathered elite. In the wings, Aiden adjusted his costume, midnight blue, like the one his mother wore in her final performance. David stood nearby, his work-worn hands now elegant in a borrowed suit. "Whatever happens out there," he whispered, "you've already won." But they both knew this wasn't just about winning anymore. Screens around the venue displayed the fundraising total, the numbers climbing as wealthy patrons arrived. Dr. Lynn sat in the front row beside the treatment program's board members, her fingers crossed in her lap. Beside her, Dr. Wallace shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his son James watching the wings with professional concern. They had all read the latest medical reports. They knew what was at stake. The audience fell silent as Marcus wheeled onto the stage. "Tonight," his voice carried clear and strong, "we witness not just a performance, but a revolution in how we see ability, art, and the human spirit." In the wings, Aiden closed his eyes, feeling the ghost of his mother's hands on his shoulders. The same stage, the same battle, a different warrior. The first notes filled the hall, not the classical piece everyone expected, but a contemporary rhythm that pulsed with both struggle and triumph. Aiden emerged from the darkness, his wheelchair no longer just a medical device but an instrument of art. Each movement told a story. The basketball game where he fell, the cruel words that cut deep, the moment he discovered his mother's truth, the countless hours of practice and pain. In the audience, Tyler Jenkins leaned forward, his varsity jacket forgotten as he watched his former teammate transform space and time. Mike from the construction site wiped his eyes roughly with a calloused hand. Kai filmed everything, his usual grin replaced by intense focus. They had all become part of this story, whether they intended to or not. The choreography built to the moment they'd all been worried about. The sequence that had sent him crashing into the mirrors. Aiden felt the familiar tremor begin in his legs, but this time he didn't fight it. Instead, he incorporated the spasm into his movement, turning involuntary shock into voluntary power. The audience gasped as his wheelchair spun in controlled chaos, each rotation defying both gravity and expectation. From the wings, David watched through tears as his son painted with motion what they had never been able to say in words. Every parent's dream of a perfect child died on that basketball court years ago, but something more beautiful had taken its place. A young man who had learned to dance with his destiny rather than against it. The final sequence began, a tribute to Teresa's signature move, but evolved into something uniquely Aiden's. As he hung suspended in a gravity-defying balance, spotlights caught the determined set of his jaw, so like his mother's, yet entirely his own. In that moment, he wasn't just performing, he was proving that limitations are just variations on possibility. The music faded, leaving Aiden center stage in a pool of light. For a heartbeat, silence held the hall in its grip. Then came the sound, not just applause but a roar of recognition. In the front row, the treatment program's director was already writing on her notepad. Dr. Lynn was openly crying. Even Dr. Wallace had risen to his feet. Later that night, as the fundraising total flashed its final impressive sum, Aiden found himself surrounded by a different kind of medical team. Not ones who saw him as a problem to be fixed, but as a pioneer of possibility. The treatment program didn't just offer him a spot. They offered to build an entire research initiative around movement therapy and artistic expression. Months later, Aiden rolled through the doors of his own studio, where wheelchairs lined one wall like works of art. A new generation of dancers waited, some with visible disabilities, others with hidden battles. Their eyes held the same mix of fear and hope he once knew so well. On his desk sat his mother's old performance video beside a framed review of his gala performance. Mitchell redefines dance, disability, and determination. "Welcome," he said to his first class, feeling his mother's spirit in every word, "to a place where we don't overcome our challenges. We dance with them." Behind him, a mural showed two figures in wheelchairs, dancing across time. A mother's legacy transformed through her son's journey, their wheels leaving trails of stardust in their wake. The choice he made that night at the gala had never really been between treatment and performance. It had been about redefining what healing truly means.